Oh, there we go.
Oh my gosh, this is
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Think Outside Fishing Podcast presented by baits.com. Got an awesome guest with me here today. Matt, thank you for joining. Thank you for letting me, step into your garage, intrude on your space here. It's an awesome garage. And you guys really liked the first episode we did with Matt here in his garage. You got the most views we've ever gotten on a podcast, actually, talking about ledge fishing. So today, I was thinking, this week.
Let's run it back.
Let's run it back. Let's talk about fall fishing.
We're in the fall now. That's right.
Exactly. Today is 50 degrees, cloudy, a little bit of rain. It's been raining for 3 days here.
Yeah, fall is here for sure. Like, it doesn't rain in this area in the summer much.
Exactly.
It's fall when it finally starts raining. We got some rain the last few days. So, I'm excited to get out in the water here in the next couple of days and get a little fall bassing going.
Definitely. Sure. And we're kind of out of that, we always get that fake fall here in Tennessee when it's the toughest fishing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When you get those, it'll be really cold for maybe a week or 5 days or so. And then 80 degrees for 3 to another week. And you're like, gosh, I just want to go out there, but it's terrible. But before we jump into fall fishing, I do want to say, thank you to everyone that came out to the Yamamoto Baits Only tournament at Clear Lake this past weekend. It was a great event. Everyone caught great bags. Had a great turnout. We can't wait, to have everyone back there. It was so much fun and great, to see all the anglers out on the West Coast. So we don't get to interact with as much as, Yamamoto Baits used to, kind of where it originated.
Yeah, that was cool to watch. I was watching all the social media, the stories and everything. I seen you caught a giant one. You sent me a picture of one in practice. You got out there before the tournament. Man, that's a place that's on my bucket list for sure. I've never been out to Clear Lake, and if it turns into an annual tournament, I may have to make the trek out next year.
I was thinking we were out there. I feel like we got to rotate our pros. So we got Brent, Cody in. Now we got to get Matt, Jake, and all the the East Coast guys that have never fished it, so they can truly see how incredible of a fishery Clear Lake is. I sent Matt my first picture. My first bass actually was an 8-pounder out there. It's incredible. I hope, if you're listening to this and you have the opportunity to go, I would say to go without a doubt. It is the best lake in the country, the best lake I've ever been to, without a doubt.
Yeah, it's on my bucket list for sure. We may have to make that happen next year.
Yeah,
so you let me know when you schedule the dates for that tournament, and we'll make it work.
We'll totally make something happen. All right, let's kind of jump into it, Matt. So let's talk about fall fishing and what is it? Why do people think this is the toughest time of year to get out on the water?
So I've thought about this a lot here recently. Fall is the toughest time for fishing because, the population of bass are doing so many different things. If you look at the spring, the opposite of the fall, a lot of the bass are going to be pushing towards the bank to do some sort of spawning. They're going to be either pre-spawn, spawning, post-spawn, but they're all going to be relatively close to the same area. The fall is the opposite of that. They're spread out everywhere. You got bass that are living shallow. You got bass that are in the intermediate depths. You got bass that are chasing bait out in the middle of the lake. You got bass that are in grass. They're literally all over the lake. They're spread out. So that's why it can be a little bit tougher, because you're not targeting as many fish doing one thing. But on the flip side of that, fall fishing can be freaking awesome. When you find them, when you figure it out, they're generally stacked in really small places. That little population of fish that say, it's out in the middle of the lake chasing the bait fish, that little group of fish is going to be stacked up pretty close. And when you find those little holes, it can be a lot of fun. You catch a ton of fish.
And they're going to bite.
And they bite. They feed.
Totally.
The fall, the days are getting shorter, so they know it's triggering them. They got to feed up before winter comes. And you can have some phenomenal days in the fall. I love fishing in the fall because it's so versatile. Like I just said, there's so many different things you can do and figure out little deals. You can catch them throwing a frog. You can catch them, top water, buzz bait, that kind of stuff. You could drag a jig. You can catch them. I mean, literally, there's so many options you can do in the fall. And, it's a time of year where you got to have a lot of different baits, a lot of options, a lot of rods on the deck, and just kind of figure out what the fish are doing that day and which ones you can catch.
And you can definitely fish to your strengths. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So, that's why you see a lot of guys that, excel in the fall, and they always are just doing, their strengths, and they'll like commit to one thing in the fall, what they're good at, what they like doing. And it ends up having a good tournament.
So kind of before we dive in, we've got a plethora of baits right here we're going to dive into. You're going to kind of talk about why they're great in the fall and why you use them in the fall. Let's kind of go back to that, Ultimate Angler Championship that you fished. Was it 2 or 3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
So was that kind of that fall transition where it's probably the toughest time of year to fish? Or kind of talk to me through that tournament, why you had an incredible day one and then struggled on day two, not, saying anything bad. It's just that's fall fishing, happens. Right?
Yeah, for sure. And, you kind of touched on it earlier. This year in particular, it's been so warm all summer, even into early fall. It was still so warm, and we really hadn't got those cool days, cool nights. And that's really what kind of triggers the fall feed, if you will, is once you start getting those cool nights. So this year it was so warm for so long, and then it finally flipped and has gotten cold here recently, and you're seeing some of those things start happening. So this year was a little bit different with that, with like the lack of rain and the warm temps all year. It really was kind of more of a late summer pattern into the early fall there at Lake Gunnersville. And, I had a great first day. I caught a bunch flipping around with the FAFO. We flipped around and found out.
He totally found out the first day.
We found a few. And then, kind of on day two, I kind of committed to a little zone, and it ended up burning me. And it just, I know the fish were still there, but I just didn't get them to bite. They moved, repositioned, something happened a little bit. And, it is what it is. It's part of tournament fishing, especially in the fall. You're going to see those flip-flop days a lot in the fall.
Yeah.
But since then, I've been spending a lot of time out here on Watts Bar, dialing in the fall bite, and it's been good. It's been fun.
Awesome. So let's dive into that. We're going to kind of talk through some baits here, how you use them, why you use them, and then really, dial in fall fishing in, southeastern United States, not specifically Watts Bar, but all these lakes around here on the Tennessee River, not the Tennessee River, and kind of all that.
Yeah. So let's start with, kind of that late summer, early fall pattern, and that's going to be fishing grass. We all know everyone loves fishing grass, throwing a frog. Excellent choice right here. So this is the brand new Sonic Boom. I've been lucky to have my hands on these for quite a while. Thanks, Joey.
Yep.
You gave me a couple of these.
Of course.
And we've been able to throw this around, caught a lot of nice fish on the Sonic Boom this fall. So a frog is just a staple. That grass has grown up the most it's going to grow throughout the year. And then in conjunction with that, the lake levels start dropping a little bit as, the fall starts. And so a lot of that grass gets matted over, and that's when you pull out the frog. And those fish are going to tuck up underneath that grass when you get a cool night. And they're looking for something to come over top of them.
So why do you think the bass kind of go shallow in the fall? You're talking about, water levels dropping, pushing the fish to the bank. People would think it's kind of opposite of that, but why do the fish go to the bank and when it gets colder? It's kind of different of what you think of.
I think it has a lot to do with the bait fish. You'll notice once those nights start getting cool, a lot of the bait fish starts following back into the pockets, whether they're looking for warmer water or fresh water or whatever they're looking for in the backs of those creeks and pockets. So I think a lot of the bass end up following the food source into there, and then they're like, hey, there's a nice grass mat here. Let me just go tuck up under there and wait for a little Sonic Boom to come over my head and eat that. So, the frog is a staple. And then, if you want to back out off of, say, the matted grass and just kind of into that more submerged grass, a chatterbait is an excellent choice any time of year. But this is something that I've been playing with here lately that I'm really impressed with is that new trailer right there. And that is the fat Shad Shape Worm.
And this is actually, when this podcast will be airing, this product will be available. So next week, this product drops on Tuesday.
But you can see me holding it. Look at that tail dancing. Like, I'm not even moving it, and that tail's nonstop shaking. Yeah. So you can imagine what it does on the back of a chatterbait. And that bait right there is extremely versatile. That fat Shad Shape Worm. Excellent, chatterbait trailer, not to mention throwing it on a jig head minnow, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But, for the grass fishing, you can't beat a chatterbait any time of year, and it's no different in the fall.
Totally.
But like I said, I've really found, playing with the trailer that you put on there. Typically I would throw a Zaco on there, 3.5, the Zaco Slim.
Yep.
But playing with this fat shad shape here recently, it's really kind of creates a different action. And I've caught a few fish in the fall that I feel like I probably wouldn't have just due to that trailer there.
No, totally. So then, talking about grass fishing, do you think the bass, feel safer in the grass? Like I know even when we've been out on, Gunnersville or Nickajack, like you can punch, a couple of feet from the boat and still get a bite, which is so different from, if you're out there scoping them, they get right next to the boat, they're not going to bite.
Yeah. I feel like, they have a house over them. They feel a lot more safe and protected in there. And it definitely helps, hide the boat presence or your presence, your noise and all that kind of stuff, being down in all that grass. I feel like definitely limits a lot of that noise that they hear that they could get spooked, potentially from the boat or whatnot. So, you can definitely catch fish a lot closer to the boat in grass than you would out in the open water. For sure. But one more bait that you got to be throwing around grass, is the D-shad. So this is rigged a little differently here. This is rigged on a scamper rig. So it's an open hook. I got a stinger hook on there. So that's going to be more for fishing open water. But the D-shad in general, you can rig him weightless on just, like a round bend style hook. Throw that over top of the grass. The soft plastic jerkbait's an excellent choice really any time of the year, let's be honest. But the fall for sure. It's just a silent presentation. That's what really makes a difference between like the chatterbait or, something like that is the D-shad is going to be completely silent, not make any noise, rattling noise. And you can catch some of those fish on the D-shad.
So do you see a lot of schooling activity in the fall, like kind of on the edges of the grass mat or even like out in the middle? Is that when you're going to throw even the scamper rig with an open hook so you can actually hook them a little bit better?
For sure. So if you're looking for an area to fish in the fall, you're always looking for life. The fish are going to tell you that they're there. So you're looking for bait fish, you're looking for fish feeding, blowing up, swirling, something like that is going to be happening around that area. If it's not, you still got to fish it a little bit, but you just kind of have that on a shorter leash.
You should be seeing activity.
You should be seeing some sort of activity, bait fish, flopping out of the water, jumping, whatever,
popping a little bit.
Something. You got to be seeing some sort of activity. Rarely are you going to catch them in the fall, especially shallow in the grass, and not see, some bass blowing up somewhere. They're going to be pretty active and feeding. So you got to be looking for that for sure.
Definitely. Let's talk about the scamper rig a little bit, if you don't mind. It's kind of an interesting way to rig a D-shad, and it makes the bait work a little bit differently. Can you explain why you rig it like that?
I've got one rigged up right here that I've been playing around with.
How's that look on the Shad Shape Worm?
It plays really good right there. So if you guys aren't familiar with the scamper rig, let me pull it down here. Basically, it is a weighted straight shank hook that you thread onto your bait. Like I said, this is something I've just been playing with, or, the D-shad's really what I kind of designed this bait for, but it does a couple things. It allows you to cast these light baits a little bit further. It gives it a little weight that actually adds some vibration, and it creates some tail kick as you pull or twitch that bait through the water. So the scamper rig, it's an exposed hook. So it gives you a better hookup ratio whenever, you're fishing more open water, not in the heavy cover. And it's an excellent choice to add to any of your minnow style baits or
especially when they're schooling. Is that when you say like this bait shines when it's schooling with a D-shad or the fat Shad Shape Worm?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
For sure. This is something that haven't really talked about a whole lot yet. Really, these aren't even out yet. So
exactly.
I've been keeping it under my hat.
We're waiting until this week.
Yeah.
When this is aired, it'll be live for 2 days. So hopefully, we got some good hype around it. I've been able to use it. You've used it. It's one of the best rolling baits I've ever seen. Would you agree with that in terms of just the total roll in it?
When you rig it up on a ball head, jig head like that, this thing rolls incredible. And it's got a bigger profile than, some of the other, 4-inch style minnow baits.
Exactly.
And it really pulls some of those fish. Recently I had a day out on Watts Bar with those. There was a lot of fish, feeding heavily in bait balls out in the middle of the lake. And if you throw something that kind of blends in or looks similar to what they're feeding on, they won't really find your bait.
They can't find it. You're saying because there's so much other bait they're trying to eat.
You want a bait that has that bigger profile that they can find and kind of stand out of the group of threadfin that they're chasing.
Definitely.
And that's what this fat Shad Shape has done. And I'm really impressed with him. That's going to be a staple in my boat.
I love it. So let's talk about, minnow fishing in the fall, what you look for on a TVA lake, like Watts Bar, Chickamauga, or Guntersville. Like Guntersville really should take off soon, and all these lakes should, like right about now. We've got some cold nights, and it should be, them out there chasing the minnows.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed in the fall, this kind of be a little juicy. We're going to give up some juice, but a lot of times the fish start rising up in the water column.
Yes.
So you're not going to be very deep, like below the surface. They're going to be within, say, 10 feet of the surface.
Exactly.
And you may be out over, 20, 30, 40 feet of water, but they're going to be fairly close to the surface. So they start rising up. So you want to make sure that your minnow selection, obviously the bait is super important, but you want to make sure you have the right jig head and more particularly the size of the jig head. You want to make sure you have a light jig head to target those fish that are high up in the water column. So I'm throwing, an 1/8 or a 3/16 ounce on the fat Shad Shape Worm here recently. And this has been my go-to whenever I'm out chasing bait eaters. Definitely. When I'm throwing the jig head minnow, the fat Shad Shape's been getting the call for me.
I love it. So when you're talking about bait eaters, what do you really look for? Like you pull up to the lake, you're like, all right, I'm going to go chase the minnow eaters, the bait eaters. Where are you going to go look in the lake?
You can't really go wrong. They could literally be anywhere in the lake. That's what's kind of overwhelming about it. But probably the best starting point is going to be like at the mouth of creeks. So if you start at the mouth of some major creeks, regardless of what lake you're on, you could be at Dale Hollow, you could be Watts Bar, Chickamauga, Guntersville. If you look at the mouth, like where the main river meets the creek, somewhere in that zone, say a couple 100 yards either direction, there's probably going to be some bait and probably going to be some bass. So that's always a good place to start, is just the mouth of any major creek.
Definitely.
And you're kind of looking for those fish that are the bait and the bass that are transitioning to the back of the creek, or just looking for that bait fish in that area. So that's always just a great place to start.
Definitely. And then do you kind of look more in like you hear a lot of people talking about on the TV, they're in the creek channels. They get out in the creek channels. Do you kind of follow those back in the creek? And all right, if they're not at the front, at the point, I'm going to go back in this creek. Or do you go out? Is that kind of why you start at the point?
Yeah, that's kind of the starting point. If you start at like the mouth of the creek, and then you can go either direction. You can follow the creek channel into the creek. You can go out. And you never really know if they're going to be, say, in the middle of the creek or more along the shoreline, on the structure, on the points. Seems like every lake sets up a little different on that. So it's kind of just figuring out the nuances of that fishery and that lake.
Totally.
But
you would say like they move around, like these fish probably move more than any other fish during this time of year. Right?
They're swimming. Yeah, they're swimming around and they're looking for food. And if the food's not there, they're going to keep swimming until they find it. So it's that's one tricky part about the fall, is the fish are moving a lot. So if you find them one day, you could go back the next day and they could be gone. They could be, a half a mile from where they were the day before, just because they're following where their food is. So wherever that food ends up is where the bass are going to end up.
No, definitely. So kind of staying on the minnow style bait, let's talk about that one up there.
This guy.
At the top.
Yeah. So this is going to be from when I pull out this guy right here. So this is the Shad Shape Swimmer. This is a beautiful little killer. So this is a Fish USA exclusive. It's Becker's Grape Juice. Awesome little killer in the Shad Shape Swimmer.
Beautiful.
Right there. But whenever I pull out this little swim bait, this is going to be for more of my shallow fishing. So say, at the mouth of this creek we were just talking about, there's a shallow flat point, and I'm going to pull up on that point. There's bait fish around. You can't really scope fish up in that shallow water. Say,
the couple feet, right? Yeah, real shallow. There's bait everywhere.
Yeah, there's bait everywhere. Your screen gets blurred out. So that's when I'm throwing a little swim bait like this. Like this is the 3.7-inch Shad Shape Swimmer, just on a little ball head. I got him on a 3/16 ounce ball head. Throw him on a spinning rod, and you throw him up in that shallow water and just count him down, sink him down to the bottom, and then I'm just basically slow rolling him on the bottom, bouncing him around, maybe up off the bottom just a little bit. But you're looking for some of those shallower fish that are feeding on bait. And like I said, this is something that just catches bass regardless of where it is. So like this is shallow fishing, whether it's in the back of the creek or on a little point towards the front of the creek. The little Shad Shape Swimmer gets the call for me, and it's a cleanup bait. I mean, that's something. If I need a bite, I'm picking that up, and I'm going to catch something. It may not be a bass, but I am going to catch
a white
something.
Bass. Like
it could be a drum, a catfish, a white bass, but you're going to catch something on that guy. If
exactly.
You throw him out there.
Even when it's the toughest,
Yes.
You can go out there and go catch 20 white bass.
Yeah.
Hey, it's better than sitting at the house not doing anything. You know what I mean? So
That's what I'm all about. I'm all about just getting bites.
I remember last year we went out on Watts Bar and we were, I'm all right to give this up because I hope everyone can go out there and catch all these giant striper and, do some things to them. But it is so much fun just to go out there and catch giant fish in the fall. And they're biting bait fish. And, one bait that we can't forget about is the OG bait fish bait of all time.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
This is like another alternative for those same situations, the shallow point or, the back of creeks or something. This is the mini trap, the 1/4 ounce rattle trap. Gosh, I can't even tell you how many bass I've caught on that little bait right there.
Has it coined the term all-time best fish catcher?
Yeah,
Would you agree?
has to be. It has to be. The OG rattle trap, like that right there. I mean, that just literally, that is the exact size and profile of the bait fish in the fall.
Yes.
That small little profile. It casts really well for being such a light bait, and you can fish it, very shallow and not get hung up. You can fish it over grass. I mean, that's another option you could be throwing in the grass for sure. But that's something that I'm tying him on whenever I just want to get some bites. If it's really tough, tournament situation, whatever it may be, and I need to catch a keeper, you tie that guy on, and if there's a bass around, he's going to bite that thing.
Definitely.
For sure.
So let's say, you're pulling up to the lake. You might have already said this, but let's kind of dive more into it. What's the first thing you're going to go look at that's going to tell you either, do I need to go shallow or do I need to go deeper? Where are you going to go look first? Is it that point or is it somewhere else first? Are you going to go look at the grass first, or where's your first starting point?
Yeah, that's kind of different for every angler. It really comes down to your strengths and what you like to do and how you want to catch them. For me, I would typically start out a little bit deeper and then kind of work my way shallower as, let the fish tell me, just because I like catching the fish offshore out in the middle of the lake. If that's going on, that's how I want to catch them, on a jig head minnow or a jerk bait or something like that, even top water out there. But
definitely,
I'm going to start out deep and then work my way shallow. But, somebody else, they launch their boat, they may start shallow and work their way out deep, so it's really kind of figuring out what everybody likes. For me, I love fishing grass. So that's one thing that's like the great equalizer for me is if there's grass in a lake,
gotcha.
I have a hard time not going to that grass and trying that. And maybe I'll try it in the morning. If it doesn't work, then I'll go do what I would normally do out in the middle and then come back in the afternoon, try the grass again. But if there's grass or a frog bite to be had, I mean, that's going to be,
you're all about it, one would say.
That's going to be on the back of my mind all day.
When you're out there chasing the minnows, you're like, oh crap, they could be biting a frog. This should be way more fun.
So I'm always going to be going and trying that whenever I can. But
definitely. So let's kind of sticking with that offshore. That's more your go-to if there's no grass, right?
Yeah.
There's the minnow chasers, and then there's also those brush pile fish that we haven't really talked about on. We've got a perfect bait right there for it. But let's really dive into the brush pile fish in the fall. And this is a key player all over the country, not even just in the TVA lakes.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously you can throw the jig head minnow or something over the brush, but there's times where, a lot of those brush fish, they have, gotten a little pressured throughout the year, seeing those types of baits. And sometimes they're just sitting there looking for something a little different. And that's when you pull out a little jig. And on the back of this jig, I really like the Shinobi grub. So this is a menace grub style trailer right here. And this little dude fits on the back of a little finesse jig good. But what I really like about him is he doesn't have a very overpowering action as he falls. Those tails just kind of kick just a little bit.
Quiver,
yeah,
right?
They don't really flap really hard like you would typically think. And they just kind of quiver on the way down, like you said. And you can really, throw him into a brush pile, drag him around. It looks like a different forage. Like I said, most of the stuff that we've talked about here today has been imitating bluegill, or not. I'm sorry, not bluegill, imitating shad.
Exactly.
But the jig can imitate a bluegill or a crawfish, just something a little different for those fish. And you got to have a jig on deck all times. Like you said, whether you're fishing a brush pile, a stump, a dock,
rock piles,
anything. It's hard to beat a jig any time of year. But I've really like the Shinobi grub. It's extremely durable too. it's extremely durable plastic. So you rig one on there and you can catch quite a few fish on that bait and not be tearing up, putting on new trailers. So that's something that it's a staple on the deck all year long. Like
All
you
year.
said, you can't go bass fishing without a
Gotta
jig.
have it, like the rattle trap, chatterbait. Gotta have a jig too, right?
Gotta have a
No
jig.
matter what,
It's a staple.
no matter the time of year. So to kind of end the podcast here, Matt, what is one piece of advice? We've talked a lot about baits here, a lot about where to look in the lake to get a bite right now in the fall. What's one piece of advice you give any angler during the fall?
That's going to be a tricky one. It kind of I think I just did a YouTube video on this actually.
Did
Now
you
that I
really?
think about it. Yeah. So if you guys follow my channel, you may already know the answer.
We'll drop it below.
But yeah, so the number one tip I can give you guys in the fall is just going to be to slow down. It's kind of like a catch-22. You have to cover a lot of water and find productive areas. But when you find those areas that you see fish activity, you see bait fish, you see bass blowing up, you got to really slow down. Try a lot of different baits. That's why you got to have all these different options and really figure out what the fish want to bite that day. So if you find that area that you feel like there's bass, you see bass blowing up, you got to give them a lot of options. Throw them the little mini trap, throw them a chatterbait, throw them a D-shad. Give them plenty of options and really thoroughly fish that area. Don't just make 5 or 6 casts and get out of there, because those bass are there. So you got to really slow down and methodically approach some of those areas, and you'll end up catching some fish.
Definitely. Awesome.
But I see a lot of guys that just want to burn through an area real quick and just be on.
And they just leave them, right?
And they just fished right over, a big group of fish. So really, you got to slow down and fish methodically, and not necessarily fishing slow moving baits. It can still be, moving baits, casting and winding, but you just want to be slow and methodical in those areas.
And you're even saying it's all right to make the same cast, 5 to 10 times, because on that 10th cast, you might even get him to bite.
You might trigger them, and then once you get one, it could turn into 5, 6, 10
20 in a row, right? Exactly.
Real quick. So that's the number one tip in the fall, is just make sure you're fishing thoroughly and methodically once you find those productive areas.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt, for your time.
Yeah.
Again, thanks for everyone for joining another episode of the Think Outside podcast. We'll see y'all soon.
Oh, there we go.